I was rolling down the street near my son-in-law's place when I felt the urge to swing by and check on him. As I slowed near the gate, my chest tightened, the sight of a car nearly stopped my heart. It was my wife's Lexus, silver and polished, the very one that should have been parked safe inside our garage. Right then, a cold sense of dread hit me like a hammer. Something's off, I told myself. I cut the engine, stepped out, and crept closer to the house, moving quiet as a shadow, hoping nobody would notice me. What I heard through that cracked window would tear my life in half. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Once that old fool finally signs the papers, everything we mapped out is ours. The voice was Clara's. My wife. Her words slipped out smooth, but they struck me like venom running through my veins. I sat frozen in my car for a long second, keys still hanging from the ignition, not wanting to believe what I was hearing. Just 5 minutes earlier, I'd called my daughter Sophie. "Surprise, kiddo, let's grab dinner tonight," I'd said. She laughed, light-hearted. "Sorry, Dad, I'm not home, but Nate's there. He's buried in case files." That's what she told me. Yet here was Clara's Lexus, bold as daylight, parked right in their driveway. I killed the engine, stepped out on shaky legs, and edged toward the window. My knees felt weak, but I forced myself forward. Through a thin gap in the curtains, I saw them clear as day, my wife of 25 years draped across Sophie's couch like she owned the place, and Nate, my son-in-law, leaning against the bookshelf with that smug grin I'd grown to hate. "The timing is perfect," Nate said, his lawyer's voice sharp and rehearsed. "File in June. Claim irreconcilable differences. Under the new Iowa statutes, Clara gets half of everything acquired during the marriage. On top of that, spousal support for life." Clara laughed, that same high-tinkling laugh I used to think was charming. "The construction business alone is worth $12 million, she said, running her fingers along the couch arm. Add the rentals, the vacation house, the investments, close to $20 million total. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. Somehow, I managed to open the recording app. Nate kept talking, his tone slick and proud. "The best part is how trusting Edward is. He has no idea we've been documenting his assets for months. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations, they're all copied and tucked away." He motioned toward a thick manila folder lying on the coffee table. "He practically gave us the keys to the kingdom." Clara sighed, looking at her manicured nails like she was bored. 2 years of playing the loyal wife, she said. Pretending to care about his dull construction stories, nodding along when he stressed over payroll. God, the man actually thinks I love him. I shifted my weight, and a twig cracked under my boot. Both their heads snapped toward the window, eyes wide, like deer spooked in headlights. I pressed myself hard against the brick wall, my heart pounding like a drum, sweat running down my back despite the cool April air. "Did you hear something?" Clara's voice carried a sharp edge. "Probably the neighbor's cat," Nate muttered after a pause. Then, lowering his voice, "You're paranoid. Do you think Edward's sharp enough to figure this out before we're done?" Clara snorted. "He wouldn't see a scheme if it flashed in neon lights." Nate chuckled, a cruel sound. "By September you'll be divorced, rich, and free to do whatever you damn please." I stayed hidden, my phone catching every poisonous word, until their talk turned back to normal. Only then did I slip away and stumble back to my car. 15 minutes had passed, but it felt like years. My entire life tilted sideways. 25 years of marriage, reduced to a legal blueprint laid out by my wife and my son-in-law. That folder on the table burned in my mind. While I had been sweating through 16-hour days, building a future brick by brick, they'd been plotting its demolition. I slid into the driver's seat, staring at my hands gripping the steering wheel, the same hands that had built a construction company from nothing, that had given Clara every luxury she ever wanted, that had even walked her down the aisle when her own father refused. Her voice echoed in my head, "God, the man actually thinks I love him." The truth gutted me. Because until 30 minutes ago, I did. The front door creaked open just as I reached for my keys. Clara stepped out first, swinging her designer handbag like nothing had happened. Nate followed, adjusting his tie with that careful, polished touch. Neither expected me to be sitting there in my Honda. The way Clara's face froze when she saw me, it was like someone had slapped her. "Edward." Her voice jumped an octave. "What are you doing here?" I forced my face into something calm, even though my pulse was roaring in my ears. 25 years with this woman, and apparently, I never knew her at all. Just finished inspecting a job site nearby, I lied easily, climbing out of the car. Thought I'd drop in and see Sophie. Nate edged closer to Clara, protective, those pale gray lawyer's eyes boring into mine, looking for a slip. She's not here, Clara cut in fast. We were just, I was helping Nate sort some documents for a client. The lie rolled off her tongue like she'd practiced it 1,000 times. How many lies like that had I swallowed without ever questioning? Oh. I said lightly, keeping my tone casual. That's funny. I thought you mentioned this morning you'd be at the office until 6. Weren't you working on the Bennett proposal today? A flash of unease flickered across Clara's face, quick as lightning. I left work early. Headache, she muttered. Sorry to hear that, I said, forcing a polite nod before turning to Nate, who was watching me like a hawk. Working on anything interesting? I asked, laying on a little fake friendliness. Asset division, he answered too quickly, then stopped himself. For a divorce client. Very complicated financial situation. If the irony hadn't been ripping my life apart, it might have made me laugh. Clara's eyes darted back and forth between us like she was trying to run calculations in her head. How long have you been here, Edward? She asked. Just pulled up. Why? No reason. She gave me a smile that looked painted on. You seem tense. Everything all right? The woman who had been scheming to wipe me out financially for months was asking about my well-being. I nearly laughed in her face. Long day. You know how it is. I waved a hand toward Nate. Don't let me interrupt your little work session. We were just wrapping up, Nate said smoothly, his hand slipping onto Clara's lower back. The move was casual, maybe even automatic, but it was far too familiar. How long had that been happening behind my back? Good timing, then, I said, pulling out my phone as though checking the time, holding it just where they could see. Neither flinched, but I noticed Nate's gaze linger a little too long on the screen. I should get going anyway. Dinner doesn't cook itself. Clara gave a laugh that didn't sound real. I'll be home shortly. Just need to finish a few things here. Take your time. I opened my car door, then paused like something had just occurred to me. Oh, Clara. Dr. Whitaker's office called about rescheduling your physical. Something about a conflict with your work schedule. Her expression went blank for the briefest second, like a mask slipping. Then she snapped back with practiced speed. Must be some kind of mix-up. I'll call them later. No worries. These things happen. I slid behind the wheel, my chest pounding. See you both later. As I backed out, I kept them in the rearview mirror. They stood stiff as statues until my car disappeared around the corner, then leaned in close, whispering urgently. That three-way performance was complete now. We were all pretending nothing was wrong, though each of us knew the truth. They suspected I might have heard something. I knew they were plotting my destruction. And Clara, she was already preparing her excuses. By the time she came home, she'd have a dozen stories ready about why she'd left work early and why she was at Nate's house. What she didn't know was that my phone carried 43 minutes of crystal clear audio. Proof. Evidence. A weapon. I merged into traffic, hands steady on the wheel for the first time all night. The shock had bled away, replaced by something colder, sharper. They thought I was a fool, someone playing checkers while they played chess. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The 15-minute drive home disappeared in a blur of lights and turns, my Honda pulling itself into the circular driveway without me even thinking. The gardens Clara insisted we pay landscapers for, the fountain she demanded for our 20th anniversary, all of it passed by in silence. I sat there, staring at the house I had built with my own two hands back in 1995. Every board nailed, every wall raised, every detail carefully chosen, it had all been for her. A love letter in wood and stone to the woman now plotting to rip it away from me. I stepped inside, and the silence met me like a stranger. It wasn't peace anymore, it was hollow. Clara's presence had always filled these rooms with chatter, her complaints about neighbors, her gushing over new purchases. Now I wondered, how much of it had been real, and how much of it had just been a performance. My eyes landed on the wedding photo on the mantel. December 15, 1987. Clara glowing in ivory silk, me awkward in a rented tux. She was 22 then, working as a secretary at Doyle and Associates downtown. I was 37, finally starting to see real profit after 10 grueling years of 12-hour days and dinners of instant noodles. We'd met at Doyle's Christmas party that year. I'd renovated their offices the spring before. Clara laughed at one of my terrible jokes about concrete mixers, a laugh that sounded like silver bells and hit me square in the chest. When I asked her to dinner, she blushed and said yes so quickly I wondered if she'd been waiting on me to ask all along. Our first date at Romano's Italian stretched past midnight. She leaned in, listening closely as I rambled about my dreams of building something that lasted, something bigger than us both. Her eyes lit up when I talked about the houses I wanted to craft, the families I wanted to protect under those roofs. "You're not just building structures," she'd said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You're building homes." 6 months later, I asked her to marry me. On the kitchen table now sat our 25th anniversary card, written in her elegant blue ink just last December, "To my wonderful husband, thank you for making all my dreams come true. Here's to 25 more years of happiness. All my love, Clara." All her love. The words tasted like poison now. I wandered into the living room, eyes catching on Sophie's baby pictures. They lined the built-in shelves I had crafted myself during Clara's pregnancy, what I had sanded late into the night, proud of every inch. April 10, 1996, the day our daughter came into the world. Clara, beat to a frazzle but glowing, held that red-faced little miracle like she'd been born to be a mother. Those early years were the brightest I ever knew. She threw herself into motherhood the same way she once threw herself into planning our wedding, full force, no half measures. Parent-teacher nights, soccer matches, birthday parties with decorations that would have made a wedding planner proud. She photographed everything, catalogued everything, proud and fierce about it all. "You're the best father in the world," she told me the night Sophie graduated high school, tears on her cheeks as our girl walked across the stage. "She's going to do incredible things because of the foundation you gave her." She said it like it was all my doing. The foundation I gave her, not we. That little aside, had the cracks been showing even then? I sank down into my leather recliner, the ugly one Clara always complained about, and let those memories roll over me. The 10-year anniversary cruise to Alaska, when she actually loved the glaciers and the wildlife. Sophie's college graduation, the whole family in tears as she took her diploma. Christmas mornings that were loud and ridiculous, Clara insisting on decorations that took us weeks to put up and a single day to take down. When did "thank you for providing this life" turn into "we deserve even more"? When did gratitude morph into entitlement? The recording on my phone answered that in the coldest terms, Clara hadn't loved me for years. Maybe decades. Every kiss, every anniversary toast, every whispered, "I love you," in the dark had a purpose, kept me working, kept me earning, kept the money flowing into things she could later claim. 25 years boiled down to a legal plan laid out on a coffee table. Sitting there in the growing twilight of the living room, surrounded by the proof of what I'd thought was a happy marriage, something in me shifted from grief to calculation. Clara had been playing a long game, positioning herself for the biggest payout while never showing her hand. She clearly didn't expect that the man she'd been playing might be able to play his own hand. The rules were about to change. I forced myself to think like the businessman I had to be. When did her behavior slide from partner to strategist? The flash came back to a night in 2020. That was when Barnes Construction landed the Doyle Municipal Center job, $50 million over 3 years, the biggest contract in our company's history. I walked in that April evening thinking we'd celebrate. Maybe some champagne. Some cheering. Instead, Clara sat at the kitchen table with a real estate magazine and a calculator. "This means we can finally afford the house on Elm Street," she said without looking up. "The one with the circular driveway and the pool. The Bennetts are asking $4.2 million. No congratulations for the win, no pride in what that contract would mean for 300 workers. Just the immediate conversion of my success into what she wanted." "Clara, the project hasn't even started," I remember saying. "There's design work, permits, subs to line up, there's a lot to do before the money comes in." She looked at me then, green eyes sharp and cold. "Once you sign, the city has to pay." That conversation stretched for 2 hours. She'd sketched budgets, down to the last dollar, the new house, the country club membership, luxury cars, vacations in Europe. Noticeably, they were all hers. The pronouns were the giveaway, I'd been too wrapped up in deadlines to notice. By 2021 the demands had ramped up. The country club membership became non-negotiable once the Whitakers joined Riverside Hills. Our modest vacation cabin in Texas Hills suddenly felt second-rate next to the Johnsons' place in Aspen. Clara started name-dropping other wives, subtle comparisons about what their husbands bought for them, what they enjoyed. She began telling stories about women whose husbands got it. My sex life thinned out slowly. I blamed time and work at first. Separate bedrooms became the story, my snoring the reason, though she'd never once mentioned my snoring in 23 years. Dinner talk shifted, too. Gone were, "How was your day?" conversations, replaced by detailed accounts of what other families had, what other people showed off, who had what. Diane Harper's husband bought her a Mercedes for their anniversary, she would say, like it was news. She told me she can slice salmon with surgical precision because he appreciates everything she sacrificed for their marriage. Sacrifices, as if living in comfort while I worked my guts out was some noble suffering on her part. After Sophie's wedding in September 2023, Clara's friendship with Nate deepened. Suddenly she was hanging on legal hypotheticals, property division, spousal rights, asking questions that sounded like interest for a friend but felt like rehearsal. Phone calls multiplied and she'd slip into the other room, calling them book club or volunteer meeting. How many of those calls were really strategy sessions? I pulled the phone back up and replayed pieces of the audio again. Nate's voice, "We've been documenting his assets for months." Clara's laugh, light, pleased, before the rest of it spilled out. 25 years of devoted wife. That phrase hit different now. Suddenly her curiosity about my ledgers made sense, all those questions about valuations, the push for joint accounts while sneakily keeping her own cards, the little details that didn't add up. She'd been doing recon while I was out building the very company she planned to take. But she'd also made a rookie mistake. She'd underestimated the man who'd grown Barnes Construction from a single beat-up truck and a borrowed toolset into something real. The same head that had steered me through contracts, union talks, and city bids for 35 years flipped on like a switch. They thought they were playing chess against someone who only knew checkers. They were about to learn differently. I stood up, walked into my home office, and looked at those built-in shelves lined with 35 years of records, tax returns, contracts, partnership agreements, deeds. Everything Clara probably assumed she'd quietly copied. But she had no idea where the actual wealth lived. I pulled my phone, scrolled my contacts, and dialed the number I needed, Harold Price, my accountant, my friend, the only man who knew about the offshore structures I'd set up years back for legitimate tax planning. Time to make a call that would change the shape of things. 3 days of methodical digging had turned that office into a war room. 2 laptops hummed on the old mahogany desk I'd sanded and varnished myself. Screens full of bank statements, legal lookups, property records. Legal pads everywhere, columns titled assets, weaknesses, timeline, leverage. I'd shaved that morning, put on my navy suit, the one Clara always said made me look distinguished, and slid my reading glasses on. Funny how grief can harden into a plan when you've got 35 years of business muscle to use. Harold had been better than I'd dared hope. 3 offshore accounts, set up long ago, perfectly legal and documented, but invisible to anyone who didn't know where to dig. Clara had been cataloging the obvious stuff while the real crown jewels stayed out of sight. She'd missed the whole point. Her credit card statements told another story. $52,000 in transfers over 8 months, wired into a joint savings account I'd never opened. The beneficiary name tightened my jaw, Nathan Walker. They weren't just planning a divorce, they'd been positioning themselves as partners in a new life together long before any papers were filed. Luxury lunches at Riverside Country Club. $300 spa days. Designer clothes bought on the same days she claimed book club meetings. Every charge painted a picture of a woman rehearsing a life she intended to live without me. The irony of the 8th Hermes bag she bought last Tuesday, after whining about grocery prices that morning, wasn't lost on me. Nate's weaknesses filled in the rest. A few calls to old contacts in the trade, and I had a decent profile on Travis, the ambitious attorney who'd smiled while plotting to steal my life. He was drowning in school debt, about $195,000, and carrying a $9,100 monthly lease on an office chosen for appearance, not cents. He promised subcontractors payment next week and then vanished when bills were due. Kevin Doyle told me over coffee, Walker's sharp, but he lives champagne on a beer budget. State Bar Records added the cherry on top, 2 complaints last year about client funds, both dismissed but recorded. In legal work, even the shadow of an ethics complaint leaves marks. I sat back in my chair and let the map of facts settle. 72 hours of patient digging had produced a tidy little dossier. Clara and Nate had badly misread their opponent. They'd treated me like a sleepy, trusting husband who never checked the books. They forgot I'd built Barnes Construction from scratch into a multi-million-dollar concern. My phone buzzed and pulled me out of the calculations. Sophie's name flashed on the screen. I kept my voice soft, steady. "Hey, sweetheart. Everything okay? Dad, I need to ask you something." Her voice was careful, that neutral tone kids use when they're treading on glass. "Is everything okay between you and Mom lately? There's been this weird tension when I'm around you too." My thumb tightened on the phone. How much did she know? How deep did Nate dig with her? I swallowed, keeping everything as normal as I could. "What makes you ask?" "It started with little things." Sophie called, voice careful. "Mom seemed stressed about money," she said. That alone should have sounded wrong, the business was booming. Then she added, "And Nate keeps asking weird questions about how your company is set up. Who owns what, how partnerships work. It feels like they're fishing for information." Hearing that from my daughter, who'd studied psychology and could smell predatory behavior a mile away, set my jaw. "Probably just curiosity," I said, keeping my tone even. "Your mom's always been interested in financial security." Sophie didn't sound convinced. "Dad, if something was really wrong, you'd tell me, right?" she asked. That question hung there like a loaded gun. Tell her what? That her mother was planning to strip me bare? That her husband was the architect of the whole thing? I lied because I had to. "Of course, sweetheart. Everything's fine, just business stress." After we hung up, I stared at my notes. Nate had been probing Sophie, fishing for any openings. The scope of their intel gathering was bigger than I'd thought. Time, I decided, to feed them exactly what I wanted them to see. Before I could act on that, my secure line rang. Laura Kim, my accountant for 12 years, sounded brisk and professional. "Edward, I've got the asset protection documents ready for signature. When you said you wanted the estate plan updated, I prepared some optimal structures." I let the pause do some work. "This is more than estate planning, isn't it?" she asked. 30 years in forensic accounting taught her to read between the lines. "Should I ask what we're protecting against?" I said, "Domestic." Her silence said she understood. She'd handled divorce cases for our crews before. "I'll have everything ready by noon," Laura promised. "Once signed, the business assets will be insulated from personal legal action. Whoever tries to go after your personal finances won't even see the real holdings." By 10 a.m., I was across the polished table from George Whitman, First National's president and my golf partner of 15 years. The mahogany conference room smelled like coffee and leather, business as usual. "Account security review," I told him, sliding a stack of papers forward. "I need joint access points verified and temporarily frozen, pending in-person ID checks." George raised an eyebrow. "This is comprehensive, Edward. Every joint account, credit line, auto pay, everything." "You may not ask why," I said with a smile I didn't feel. "Once you sign, the holds take effect immediately," George explained. "Account holders will be notified that access requires in-person verification with photo ID and secondary documents." He studied me. "This is going to be inconvenient for Clara." "I'm counting on that," I said. At 11:47 a.m., the bank locks went live. Right about the time Clara was sitting down to her weekly lunch at Riverside Country Club with her usual crowd, the security triggers flipped. My phone buzzed at 12:03, our first decline transaction alert. I was leaning over contractor bids when the panic call arrived at 12:50. "Edward," she said, breathless. "Something's wrong with our accounts. My card was declined at lunch. The bank says there's a security hold. Do you know anything about this?" Perfect innocence, no mention of the joint account with Nate, no word about the $52,000 that had been siphoned over months, no admission she'd been moving money behind my back. "Security hold?" I said, sounding concerned. "Did they say why?" "Something about verifying identity and access," she hiccuped. "It's embarrassing, I'm sitting here with Deborah and Susan and Janet and I can't even pay for lunch." Her distress was real, but not because her plot was threatened, she was upset because her social standing had been publicly inconvenienced. After 25 years, I knew her priorities. "I'll call George Whitman right away," I said. And then I didn't. Instead I drove out to the site where my crew was pouring the foundation for the new medical center. The machines and the men's voices steadied me after 3 days of having my life run through a grinder. Her texts came all afternoon. Clara, 1:47 p.m. Still can't access anything. This is ridiculous. Clara, 2:23 p.m. George Whitman's secretary says he's in meetings all day. What kind of bank president is too busy for his best customers? Clara, 3:15 p.m. Even our emergency credit line is frozen. How am I supposed to buy groceries? Each message landed with a hard little satisfaction. For 25 years she'd taken security for granted while I pulled 60-hour weeks. Now she felt the shock of that security snapping away. Nate's reaction proved telling, too. At 4:30 p.m. my private investigator, Victor Delgado, called with an update. Walker had tried to access the shared account with your wife 3 times that afternoon. When that effort failed, Walker tried to pull money from what looked like a trust account, probably Sophie's education fund he'd been managing. That one was frozen too, by my instruction. I got the rundown from Victor: angry calls to bank reps, threats about lawsuits, demands to speak with management. Classic scene, an overconfident lawyer discovering his leverage has vanished. By 6 that evening I was back in my office, staring at the day's battlefield. Every shared account frozen. Every joint credit line suspended. Every autopay and sweep set to require my personal okay. Clara's access to 25 years of what we'd accumulated was now whatever cash she had in her purse. Legally sound moves, a husband protecting marital assets while we updated estate planning. George Whitman would confirm every protocol was followed to the letter. But the point wasn't legality, the point was the message. The people who'd planned to ambush me were suddenly unarmed. My phone buzzed at 6:47. Clara's number. When she spoke this time, the tone was different, not the practiced manipulation anymore, but raw, frantic. That's when I knew how fast conspirators turn on one another once the scheme starts to fail. Victor had been parked across the street in a coffee shop, watching the Walker and Associates lobby with binoculars. At 7:15 p.m. he'd seen Clara come barreling in, heels clicking on marble, breathless. The neighbor overheard her frantic driveway call, "Nate, we need to talk. Something's gone terribly wrong." Discretion had never been her strong suit. On the 14th floor, Nate's corner office was all crisis control. Victor spotted 2 figures hunched over a table strewn with papers, their shoulders tight, bodies shouting emergency. Through the thin ventilation, the words carried over to the neighboring accounting firm. "Alan knows something and he's cutting everything off. I can't even put gas in my car," Clara told him. Nate's reply was clipped, professional, the litigation voice engaged. "Timing's not a coincidence. 3 days ago you said he showed up unexpectedly at Sophie's when we were discussing strategy. He must have overheard something. How much did he hear?" Clara demanded. "Enough to know the plan," Nate said, flipping through documents. Then the admission that made the room go cold: assume he recorded the conversation. "Everything we said about assets, timing, strategy, it may be documented." Silence fell. 2 people who'd congratulated themselves now realizing their mark had been several moves ahead. "What do we do?" Clara whispered, the earlier bravado gone. "We accelerate," Nate answered. "No more slow rollout. We file Monday morning for emergency divorce with immediate spousal support. We claim Alan's engaging in financial abuse by restricting your access to marital assets." "Financial abuse?" Clara's voice picked up like a woman who hears a good idea. "That could be persuasive." "Exactly," Nate said. "We paint him as controlling with money, someone who uses finances to intimidate. The frozen accounts become evidence of his pattern, not a bank-initiated precaution. Papers shuffled, strategy hardening into full attack mode. Document every instance of emotional or financial control," Nate instructed. "Think back. Any time he made decisions without you, questioned your spending, used money to influence your choices, record it." "But Nate's never been controlling about money," Clara protested. "He's always provided." "Then we reframe it," Nate said smoothly. "Generosity as manipulation. Provision as engineered dependency. Every gift, every vacation, every comfortable purchase becomes proof he deliberately isolated you financially. The audacity of it was breathtaking, turning 25 years of a man's devotion into alleged evidence of abuse. And Sophie? Clara asked, worried. She won't automatically believe me. Her training in psychology makes her skeptical. Perfect, Nate said, voice bright with satisfaction. Her skepticism is leverage. If she voices concerns about family dynamics, we treat it like an expert observation. Her professional background lends weight to her testimony. If she questions the emotional climate at home, we frame it as confirmation of his manipulative behavior. They were ready to turn their daughter into a witness against me, a calculated, cold piece in their litigation playbook. The scheme they crafted was slick in its cruelty. Use our daughter's professional skepticism against me. Twist every gesture of care into evidence of control. Turn protective financial safeguards into so-called abuse. Monday morning, Nate said with the cool certainty of a man drawing up battle plans, I'll file for emergency restraining orders to freeze any further asset movements. Immediate spousal support, $15,000 a month. And I'll request temporary exclusive occupancy of the marital home. He leaned in, his tone colder. By Wednesday, we'll have him painted as an abusive husband who needs court supervision to keep him from financial intimidation. And if he resists? Clara asked. Then we escalate, Nate replied smoothly. Harassment charges if he calls you directly. Stalking claims if he digs into what we're doing. Emotional abuse allegations if he dares question our story. His voice hardened with smug satisfaction. The beauty of domestic abuse law is that denial becomes proof. The more he fights, the guiltier he looks. Clara laughed, but it was hollow. Poor Edward. He doesn't realize what he's unleashed. 25 years of being the trusting husband. Time to prove nice guys finish last. For another hour they mapped out their lies, coordinating stories, setting up private channels, preparing for what Nate proudly called total legal warfare. Every word, every interaction, every financial transaction would be twisted into evidence of my supposed abuse. This wasn't just about money anymore, it had grown into a campaign to ruin me, my finances, my reputation, even my relationship with my daughter. 30 years of building a community name, a business, a family, reduced to targets on their strategy board. At 9:30 p.m., Clara finally left Nate's office. Her phone buzzed before she even hit the parking garage, Nate's first tactical text, remember, you're not an angry wife anymore. You're a terrified victim finally finding the courage to escape your abuser. That was their line. Their war had officially begun. By Saturday morning, Clara was playing her next card. She invited Sophie to Caf Luna, the little bistro where they'd met once a month for mother-daughter brunches for 5 years. Same corner table, same cozy setup, but this time Clara wasn't there as a mother. She came in as a woman crafting a victim's story. Sophie, I need to talk to you about your father. Her tone was careful, fragile. I think something's wrong with him mentally. Sophie set her coffee down with the measured calm of someone sliding into therapist mode. What kind of wrong, Mom? Controlling. Paranoid, Clara whispered. He's been cutting me off from our accounts. Says it's for security, but, she let the words trail, hoping Sophie's mind would do the rest. How long? Sophie asked. Months, maybe longer. I thought it was stress. But yesterday, he froze me out of everything. I couldn't even buy lunch. Sophie leaned closer, professional instinct kicking in. Mom, financial control can be a type of abuse. But it can also be legitimate, like in business transitions or legal issues. What's Dad's explanation? That wasn't the response Clara wanted. She'd expected comfort, not clinical objectivity. He says it's routine account security. But Sophie, I've been married to him 25 years. This isn't routine. It's punishment. Punishment for what? Sophie pressed. Clara hesitated, her web fraying. How much could she reveal without exposing herself? Maybe because I've been questioning our marriage. Maybe he's trying to scare me into staying. Mom, Sophie said softly, but with the patience of a professional, are you saying Dad is abusing you financially to stop a divorce? Or are you saying you're considering divorce and Dad's protecting assets? The distinction cut too close. Clara shifted, scrambling. I'm saying, Your father's behavior has changed, and I thought as a psychologist, you could help me understand. As a psychologist, Sophie replied, voice steady, I'd say sudden changes usually have triggers. What happened 3 days ago that might have caused Dad to restrict access? Clara's mind scrambled. Sophie wasn't bending. Each question widened the cracks in Clara's victim story. I don't know, she murmured finally. That's what scares me. But Sophie's gaze was sharp, clinical. She read micro-expressions, tone, hesitation. Mom, she asked bluntly, are you asking me for psychological advice, or are you asking me to take sides? That broke Clara's script. Her attempt to recruit her daughter had collapsed under the weight of Sophie's training. I'm asking you to help me understand what's happening to our family, Clara said weakly. Then I suggest you speak honestly with Dad about his concerns, Sophie answered. Not ask me to psychoanalyze him based on your interpretation. Clara stormed out of the bistro 20 minutes later, angry that Sophie hadn't fallen for the act and frantic about what it meant. If my daughter refused to back up her mother, the whole victim story would crumble under real scrutiny. Meanwhile, about 40 miles away at Barnes Construction HQ, new information landed that would reshape the fight entirely. Kevin Doyle called at 10:15 a.m. I'd just been flipping through weekend job reports when his voice came over. Edward, thought you'd want to know, Nate Walker's in trouble with the state bar. They're digging into how he handled payments on the Harper job. What kind of trouble? I asked, setting my coffee down. 3 subcontractors filed complaints for non-payment last month. He collected fees from his client and didn't forward them to the trades. If that's true, it's a trust account violation. My brain started calculating instantly. How bad is it? I said. Bad enough they scheduled a hearing for next week. Walker's scrambling to find $25,000 to square those subs before the bar gets to him. 25 grand, the exact shortfall my own digging had uncovered. Would those subcontractors talk if someone from the trade reached out? I asked. Absolutely. They're livid, Kevin said. He promised payment for months, always had an excuse. These are small operators, they can't eat that kind of loss. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone, making what I like to call strategic calls. Bob Alvarez at Alvarez Electrical, owed $8,400, waiting 8 months. David Park at Park Plumbing, owed $9,200 since last October. Randy Briggs at Briggs Roofing, still short $7,500 from a job finished in November. Each call I framed as a routine reference check before considering Walker for legal work. Each contractor warmed up, then unloaded, missed payments, broken promises, excuses, blame shifted to clients or courts. By 1 p.m. I had a stack of documented complaints showing a pattern, using client trust funds like a personal account, misleading trades about payment timing, and violating state bar rules. At 2:30 p.m. I called the state bar's ethics line. I want to file a formal complaint for attorney misconduct, I told the intake person. I laid out names, amounts, dates, and a timeline of misrepresentations. 3 more contractors volunteered to be witnesses. By 4 p.m., Nate's office was getting calls from the bar about an expedited inquiry and a mandatory hearing. The professional scaffolding of his plan, the reputation he'd meant to weaponize against me, was officially under investigation. At 4:47 p.m., Victor Delgado texted, Walker just left with 3 boxes. Follow him? I replied, no. I know where he's heading. He was driving straight to Clara, panic does that to people. Let them run. Let them make mistakes. That kind of scrambling is where conspiracies fall apart. Those 2 days of fallout gave Sophie a chance to breathe and think. The drive to my office felt like heading toward a reckoning she'd been dodging for a long time. My building stood plain and solid against the April sky, brick and steel, honest work. Everything Nate's glass tower pretended to be but was not. Laura, my secretary of 8 years, greeted Sophie with the kind of warmth you only give folks who show up on job sites and at company barbecues. He's expecting you. Come on in. I rose to meet her, watching her walk across the floor. She carried herself differently than she used to, more composed, shoulders squared, the posture of someone who'd made difficult calls before. Dad, we need to talk about you and Mom, she said. Her voice had that careful neutrality she used with clients, the patient tone of a trained psychologist. I've spent 2 days looking into this. I need to hear your side. I asked what Clara had told her. Sophie sat down across from my desk, hands folded just so. She says you're controlling, manipulating money, maybe emotionally abusive, she said. She wants me to back up a victim narrative using my professional credentials. Hearing that clinical phrasing from my daughter felt strange. It was precise, detached. I recognized the tactic. She'd stepped back emotionally so she could evaluate facts without bias. And what do you think? She asked. I think your mother tried to manipulate you the way she's been manipulating me, I said. Sophie's green eyes, so much like Clara's but somehow clearer, studied my face. Play me the evidence, Dad. I need to hear it. Her voice was steady. Direct. I felt the weight of that moment. If I hit play, there'd be no turning back. No protecting her from what her mother and husband had said behind closed doors. But Sophie was 30, a licensed psychologist. She could handle reality. I unlocked the audio and let it run. Clara's voice filled the office, smooth and casual. When that old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. Nate's lawyer cadence followed, cold, clinical, walking through timelines, asset division, how best to slice things for maximum gain. For a minute Sophie sat like a clinician at work, composed, detached, taking in the data without blinking. Then, when Clara said, 25 years of playing the devoted wife, something in her cracked. Her hands clenched once, then loosened. The recording ended. Silence stretched between us like thin ice. How long have you known? She asked finally. 6 days, I said. I overheard them last Tuesday at Sophie's house. And you've been? She waited. Building a defense while trying to keep everything appearing normal, I answered. She leaned back, turning the facts over. Mom asked me to evaluate your mental state, she said. She wanted me to say professionally that you were showing abusive patterns. What did you tell her? I asked. That I couldn't ethically assess someone without a proper evaluation, Sophie said. And that her claims didn't match what I know of your behavior. Her voice sharpened. She tried to weaponize my training, Dad, use my credentials as a stick. That cut in a way I hadn't expected. Betrayal is a lonely thing, but hearing my daughter say it out loud, about both of them, landed heavy. I'm sorry you were dragged into this, I said. I'm not sorry, she replied, resolve hardening. I'm glad I know. Now what? I looked at her, at the woman I'd watched grow up. Strong. Independent. Not mine to command. That's your call, Sophie, I said. I won't make you choose sides. She rose then. Decision written in her stride. I choose truth over family loyalty. Evidence over emotion. I support the parent who didn't try to corrupt my professional ethics. Relief washed through me, quickly followed by that cold spike of worry. What about Nate? I asked. Her face went hard. My husband participated in a conspiracy to financially destroy my father while using my practice as cover. That marriage is over. Her tone was clinical, not hysterical. I'm not reacting out of anger. I'm making a character and behavior assessment. She headed for the door, pausing only long enough to add, I'll testify honestly about family dynamics if it comes to that, but I will not be anyone's weapon. Not yours. Not theirs. She left my office with the kind of determined step people take when they've found moral clarity in a mess designed to hide the truth. 20 minutes later she was unlocking her own front door, keys cold in her hand, ready to confront the man who'd betrayed not just me but the ethics she'd built her career on. I sat alone after she left, surrounded by 35 years of work, certificates, ledgers, dust on the shelves, and felt something I hadn't felt since this all started, hope. Maybe the truth still mattered. Maybe evidence could do what anger couldn't. At 7:30 p.m. Sophie's key turned in the lock. Nate hadn't expected her home early. His surprise showed in the way he sprawled on our living room couch, legal papers scattered across the coffee table, a half-empty whiskey bottle within reach. She walked in without fanfare, set her purse down with deliberate calm. We need to talk, she announced. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. Nate didn't look up right away, just pretended to read case files like a man who'd rehearsed calm. Barrett's deposition got pushed, he muttered, eyes avoiding her. I know about the conspiracy, Nate. Sophie's words were steady, measured. The mask slipped, desperation flashed across his face. What conspiracy, he blurted, then tried to stitch the edges back together with lawyer-smooth denials. The one where you and my mother planned to financially destroy my father and use my professional credentials to back false abuse claims, she said. I watched him go from practiced litigator to a man watching his world collapse. Sophie, you must be misunderstanding, he stammered. 25 years of playing the devoted wife, he tried to mimic Clara's line, but the color drained from his face. He'd heard the recording, that much was clear. How much did you hear? Sophie demanded. Everything, I told her later. Asset strategy, timelines, fee calculations, her performance routine. I kept my distance, professional, measured. There was no drama in facts, only the clean stroke of truth. By the time Clara's scheme hit the light of day, social consequences moved faster than any courtroom. The next morning at Riverside Country Club, the dining room buzzed as usual, silverware, gossip, the gentle clink of china, but groups quieted when she approached. Deborah Whittaker, who'd spent years playing bridge with Clara, found her eggs Benedict suddenly fascinating. Susan Doyle chose an urgent phone call over conversation. By the time Clara reached her table, the looks and the silence told her everything. The conspiracy was public. Clara, dear, Paula Reynolds cooed, her voice sugar-coated but sharp underneath. We missed you at the planning committee meeting yesterday. What meeting? No one told me, Clara replied, bristling. Oh, didn't you get the message? We had to make some organizational changes. I'm sure you understand. And just like that, Clara began to see the pattern. Calls that once came daily now went unanswered. Invitations that used to arrive like clockwork were rescinded without explanation. Social doors closed quietly, efficiently, leaving her standing on the outside. Meanwhile, I was running my own campaign, and it was working. 35 years of honest dealing had built me a reputation no courtroom stunt could erase. My lunch with George Whitman at the bank was a perfect example. Over coffee, I mentioned family difficulties, with just enough truth to ground my story without looking vindictive. Clara and my son-in-law developed concerning plans with our assets, I said calmly. I had no choice but to take protective measures. George's face held exactly what I wanted, professional understanding mixed with personal sympathy for a friend blindsided by betrayal. That evening, at the Chamber of Commerce board meeting, Kevin Doyle asked why Clara had missed the recent fundraising dinner. I let the weight show in my voice. Marriage difficulties, I said. Sometimes you learn people aren't who you believed. After 25 years of marriage, I found out she had plans of her own. I'm just grateful I discovered it when I did. By Sunday night, the fallout had spread. Clara's social exile was nearly complete. The country club's membership committee suddenly scheduled a routine review of her status. A charity board quietly accepted her resignation from posts she hadn't actually given up. Whispers travel fast when they're fueled by evidence. Nate wasn't faring better. His practice was bleeding clients. 3 major accounts walked out, citing concerns about judgment and ethics. Miller Industries, worth $200,000 a year, sent a letter formally ending their relationship, bluntly stating they'd lost confidence in his discretion. From my office, I could almost hear the desperation in Clara's Sunday night call to Nate, her voice sharp and frantic through the thin apartment walls. Victor Delgado had ears on. Everyone knows, Nate. Everyone. I can't show my face anywhere in this town. We'll file emergency motions Monday morning, Nate shot back. Force Edward onto defense. Before what? She snapped. Before you lose your law license? Before I pack my bags and move back to my sisters in Oklahoma? Their bickering stretched until midnight, 2 cornered conspirators realizing guilt doesn't equal unity. Tomorrow would bring their last gamble. I was ready for it. Monday morning, Clara walked into Deborah Klein's downtown office. Deborah was infamous, her scorched earth divorce tactics had made her both feared and expensive. From the glass-walled conference room, Clara could see the courthouse across the street, the arena where she hoped to break me. But Deborah's face told a different story, skepticism, not confidence. Mrs. Barnes, I've reviewed the materials, Deborah said crisply. Your husband's protective measures appear legally sound. Joint account holders are within their rights to restrict access during marital discord. But it's financial abuse. Clara's composure cracked, her voice rising. He's controlling every cent, every aspect of my access to the money we earn together. Deborah's eyes flicked down at her notes. According to tax records spanning 25 years, he earned that money. Your financial contributions appear minimal. You haven't been employed since 1989. Clara's face flushed red. What she had once called homemaking, her badge of luxury and security, was now reduced to evidence of dependency. What about emotional abuse? Intimidation tactics? Clara pressed, her desperation seeping through the polished victim act. Deborah's reply cut like a scalpel. Can you document specific incidents? The question hung in the room like smoke, and for the first time Clara's carefully built persona wavered. Clara had spent sleepless nights trying to stitch together a story of abuse out of 25 years of nothing but my consideration and generosity. He's always been controlling with money, she told her lawyer. Examples? Deborah asked flatly. Any threats? Physical intimidation? Has he ever isolated you from friends or family? Clara faltered. Well, no, but... Mrs. Barnes, domestic abuse requires evidence. Has he ever threatened you physically? Prevented you from leaving the house? Monitored your phone calls? Each question shredded her narrative. The truth was simple, I'd never raised my voice in rage, never barred her from going anywhere, never once questioned her friendships. Her story couldn't hold water. 10 blocks away, Nate Walker was fighting his own fire. Monday morning the State Bar's Ethics Committee rang him directly. Mr. Walker, we've received additional complaints about your handling of client trust accounts, the investigator said. Specifically, allegations you've used client funds for personal expenses. Nate's grip tightened around the phone. Those allegations are unfounded. I've always kept proper books. The voice on the other end was calm, relentless. We have documentation from Alvarez Electrical. Invoices submitted 8 months ago. Promises of payment. Yet your client settled 6 months back. Where are those funds now? The truth sat in Nate's personal checking account, money diverted to pay rent and student loans. What he had thought of as cash flow management now looked a lot like embezzlement. There may have been administrative delays, he tried. Mr. Walker, a formal hearing is scheduled for Thursday morning. Bring financial records for all client accounts dating back 18 months. By Wednesday night, Clara and Nate were cornered. Their strategy session, in Nate's nearly empty office, looked more like two generals staring at a battlefield with no ammunition left. We have to file domestic violence claims, Clara declared, her tone brittle with false confidence. It's the only way to force him into defense. Clara, false allegations are a felony if we're caught, Nate snapped. And with the evidence Edward probably has. What evidence? I've never said anything in front of witnesses, she shot back, then froze. The recording. The one that had triggered this collapse. The recording proves we were plotting financial strategy, Nate said grimly. Not documenting his abuse. Then we reframe it, Clara insisted. Your legal skills. My testimony. We make it about years of emotional manipulation, financial control. A long-term pattern. Nate stared across the table at the woman who 6 months ago had been a bored housewife hungry for drama. Now she was suggesting perjury in federal court. If this fails, we're both finished, criminal charges, he said. If we don't try, I'm broke and you're disbarred anyway, Clara countered, her eyes hard. At least this way we fight back. Their last hope was Thursday's restraining order hearing. Either their Hail Mary would land, or they'd hand me more evidence for my case. They never considered I'd been documenting every call, every whispered meeting, every lie they'd told. By May 1st, the Travis County Courthouse felt like a battlefield I knew how to fight on. 35 years of honest work had turned into something solid I carried with me, like armor. Judge Ellen Chambers presided, no nonsense, seasoned, a woman who'd seen every brand of family deception come through her courtroom. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table beside Deborah Klein, dressed carefully for the role she'd chosen, plain conservative clothes, little makeup, nervous gestures that might have been genuine now that the stakes were real. Mrs. Barnes, Judge Chambers began, scanning the petition, you're alleging your husband engaged in financial abuse and intimidation. Can you describe specific incidents that led you to fear for your safety? Clara's voice quivered with rehearsed fragility. Your Honor, for months my husband has restricted my access to our accounts. He monitors my spending. He's made threats, about what would happen if I tried to leave. What kind of threats? The judge asked, pen poised. Financial threats, Clara said quickly. That I'd be left with nothing. That he'd use his business connections to destroy my reputation. Clara paused just long enough to make it sound convincing. Last week, he cut off all my access to money. I couldn't even cover basic necessities. I sat there and watched my wife of 25 years spin lies with growing confidence, layering fiction on top of fiction. She was painting abuse out of thin air, rewriting decades of me providing for every want she ever had. Judge Chambers shifted her gaze. Counselor Doyle, does the defendant wish to respond? Richard Doyle rose slowly, carrying the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 3 decades in the courtroom without once dirtying his hands on perjury. Your Honor, he said evenly, we have evidence showing that Mrs. Barnes's accusations are not only false but part of a deliberate conspiracy to strip my client of his marital assets. The judge's eyebrow arched. That's a weighty allegation, Counselor. We have a 43-minute audio recording, Richard said, in which Mrs. Barnes and her co-conspirator, attorney Nathan Walker, discuss staging this very scenario. The blood drained from Clara's face. Deborah Klein bent to whisper in her ear, but there's no patching a hole once the water's pouring in. Exhibit A, Richard continued, plugging his phone into the courtroom system. Clara's voice filled the chamber. When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for. The courtroom sat in rapt silence as the full recording played, 43 minutes of betrayal unspooled. Clara mocking our marriage. Nate coldly laying out legal maneuvers. Their plan to weaponize Sophie's psychology credentials. And then the line that hit like a hammer, the man actually believes I love him. The contrast was brutal. Clara's trembling testimony about fear for her safety, set against the cruel laughter of a woman bragging about manipulation. When the recording ended, Judge Chambers leaned forward. Mrs. Barnes, do you have any response? Clara opened her mouth but no words came. Her lawyer's face had gone pale. Your Honor, Deborah Klein said carefully, I move to withdraw from this case. I was not made aware of these circumstances when I agreed to represent Mrs. Barnes. Motion granted, Judge Chambers said briskly. Then she turned her stare on Clara, the kind of look reserved for liars and perjurers. Mrs. Barnes, your petition for a restraining order is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, this matter is being referred to the district attorney for review of possible perjury charges. The gavel came down. Its echo filled the courtroom. 2 weeks later, the divorce settlement showed the true cost of Clara's gamble. Her lies stripped her of spousal support. The prenuptial agreement she'd once signed in 1980 without hesitation limited her to a fraction of what she'd expected. Nate's career collapsed alongside hers. His suspension turned permanent when the bar uncovered $138,000 in misappropriated client funds. Last I heard, he was in Amarillo, working as a paralegal, stripped of the title he'd once flaunted. Sophie filed her own divorce papers the day after court, citing irreconcilable differences. She's building a new therapy practice now, specializing in recognizing manipulation, helping families avoid the traps she'd seen firsthand. 6 months later, Clara's working retail in the same mall where she once burned through my income on handbags and designer shoes. The irony doesn't escape me. As for me, I rebuilt Barnes Construction stronger than before. The community's support carried me through and brought in new contracts, deeper partnerships. My house feels different now, quieter, but honest. No more staged conversations, no more rehearsed affection. Just the sound of rain hitting windows. I installed myself, in a home that finally belongs to me again. Clara was right about one thing. I really did believe she loved me. Now I finally understand the difference between genuine love and a performance. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.